You're listening to the ATS Breathe Easy, the latest podcast, brought to you by the American Thoracic Society.
Welcome. You're listening to ATS Breathe Easy. Coming up, we will have the latest making headlines for your health. I'm your host, Patti Tripathi, a former CNN News Group anchor and considered one of the first Indian American to deliver the news on network television. For some background, and many of you know already, ATS Breathe Easy podcast has been a staple for nearly a decade. We're making some exciting changes, attempting to breathe new life to bring you concise, easy to digest information that impacts health and well-being. Each Tuesday, you'll be able to listen and watch Breathe Easy, hosted by 4 of our regular hosts, including 3 ATS experts. Each Thursday, you'll find a podcast from one of our 4 ATS scientific journals. So tune in Tuesdays and Thursdays for ATS podcast drops. On the first Tuesday of every month, join me for notable news headlines as I welcome guests who share the latest in pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine, whether you're a healthcare professional, researcher, patient, or patient advocate. The ATS Breathe Easy podcast is for you. At the end of each show, we'll also share some important deadlines for ATS events, grants, and awards. Coming up, we'll speak with Teresa Barnes, a self-described pulmonary fibrosis warrior. But first, here are some of the latest headlines in pulmonary critical care and sleep medicine.
Tuberculosis is back in the headlines in the U.S. and around the globe, one of the largest outbreaks since the 1950s. The Kansas Department of Health and Environment announced an outbreak of TB with dozens of people infected in the Kansas City area. 67 people are being treated, and another 79 with latent TB are being monitored. As the largest bilateral TB donor, USAID has invested more than $4.7 billion to combat TB since 2000 and has reportedly contributed to saving more than 79 million lives. Ongoing funding is now uncertain. The ATS recently issued updated clinical practice guidelines for TB treatment in the American Journal of Respiratory and Critical Care Medicine. Authors recommend shorter treatment regimens, including a 4-month regimen for drug-susceptible TB and 6-month regimen for drug-resistant TB.
And we'll be right back for Heart to Heart with a lung advocate who has lost a number of loved ones to pulmonary fibrosis.
Hello, I'm Patti Tripathi, and so pleased to launch as the host of this podcast with Teresa Barnes. She is self-described pulmonary fibrosis warrior and lung research advocate. She worked with the Coalition for Pulmonary Fibrosis and is co-founder of fluidIQ, a public benefit company that has created a tiny 3-inch ventilator that operates on airflow rather than battery or electric. So fascinating. She's joining me today from St. Louis. Hey, Teresa, how are you?
Hey, Patti, I'm great. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. So we met, 20 years ago? Both lobbying in Congress for a Pulmonary Fibrosis Awareness Week, correct? And tell me a little bit more about your background. You've had at least 3 family members who've passed away with complications from IPF or PF.
Right. That's true. We actually lost a total of 5 people in about a 10-year period. So, I was finishing college when my dad was diagnosed with the disease, and ultimately he was transplanted and did not survive the transplant. And then about a couple of years later, one of his transplant surgeons hired me to help him start a medical device company. And this first week on the job, I interviewed a PR firm, and they were helping start the first nonprofit for a lung disease they said, we're sure you've never heard of. And it turned out that, of course, it was pulmonary fibrosis. And so I helped start the Coalition for Pulmonary Fibrosis because of that. And later that organization blended with the Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. We lost 5 people in a 10-year period, as I mentioned. And so we joined the genetic research that was happening very early in the genetic research in the US back in like 2001. So, I feel like I've grown up at the American Thoracic Society, and I'm really grateful that we have this opportunity to chat and talk about, what's going on in the space.
Have you seen a lot of changes as far as research goes in the last 20 years, or has it moved at snail's pace?
I think it's both. One, there's been a significant amount of a change, of advancement over the last 20 years. Thankfully, there are more people entering the lung space than ever before from a research perspective and a clinical perspective. I think that it's not a lack of having talent and people on the teams nationwide that are trying to make a difference, and actually worldwide doing research in the lung. I think we're really limited by, I think, number one, funding. There just isn't enough federal funding that goes toward lung research right now. And if you look at, some of the federal budgets for other organs, lung being, especially during the pandemic, the number one cause of death in the country. And with all of these, flus and different respiratory viruses that are happening today, and then other ones that will happen in the future, it's really imperative that we make lungs a priority. And I think that's our biggest challenge. But there are huge strides that we're making. Most of the diseases that, we talk about in our community through the Public Advisory Roundtable, which we're going to talk about, a lot of those diseases now have therapies. I don't think any of them are completely curing disease, but certainly giving people better quality of life, and in some cases, lengthening lives. And in pulmonary fibrosis, that's the case. We do have 2 FDA-approved therapies that do include improve life expectancy, but it's not improving quality of life. And we can, I think, across the lung space, we can stand to improve things, I think.
Is a transplant working better now? Is it extending life anymore? I'm so sorry about your father. Is it working better?
Well, yes. I mean, I think, we have a lot more experience, and certainly the more experienced transplant surgeons and transplant centers have in doing transplants, the better they get at it. There's absolutely no question that that's the case. And I serve on the advisory group for the Scientific Registry for Transplant Recipients. And what we see is the data does appear that lung transplants are getting better, and patients are living longer across the board, and they're living better. They're better quality of life. But we still have the age-old problem that there just simply aren't enough organs. And so that's a challenge. And then 2 years ago, there were rule changes regarding the way that lungs in particular were allocated, and the rules that patients need to meet in order to be transplanted. So I think those are challenges that are ongoing. The life expectancy definitely is better. The volume of transplants is increasing, but not at the level that we'd like for it to be, because there just simply aren't enough organs. There's also these machines that are used nationwide that rehab the lungs, these what they call perfusion machines that allow them to rehab lungs that were potential donor lungs, but that would normally be discarded, that were not of the right quality for the physicians to do the transplant with. So they're able to use the perfusion machines, rehab those lungs, and transplant them with pretty much the same outcomes as you would have with an A-level lung. So it's really exciting what's happening in transplant.
And you were also saying that there's some concern because there is what you felt a stigma against pulmonary fibrosis. And that was very interesting. You were saying more than even AIDS. Go ahead.
Yes, you're right. I mean, one, I think it's not just pulmonary fibrosis, it's every lung disease. I mean, I think that there's research that shows that there is stigma, and that stigma impacts quality of life. And it also impacts, the fact that patients live longer or not. And so what we're seeing is that
is it stigma because people think they caused it themselves, or?
Well, yes. I mean, I think that's really, Patti, that's key, is that patients, if they're wearing oxygen or if they are known to have, they explain that they have a lung disease, I think most people, anyone on the street would assume that it must be their fault and that they must have caused this, and therefore they're suffering from something they could have prevented, which is not true. Many types of lung disease are certainly not under any control of the patients.
Right. You have a lot of genetic factors, you say, in your family. My mom was 51 when she was diagnosed, and she was, the youngest of 6 kids. 3 were in India and 3 in the U.S. They were all, PhDs. And she was the youngest, and she passed away. And and she was a vegetarian, never drank, never smoked. So I don't know what can be done to raise greater awareness, and what is being done. What is ATS doing?
Well, the great news is that we've made a lot of strides over the last 20 years in particular. Since I've been doing this, I feel like I've grown up at ATS, grown up looking at ways that we can increase awareness of the diseases that we talk about and that are important to our patients, and certainly important to the ATS clinicians and researchers. But there's the reality is that there is a stigma, and that these lung diseases, the patients are fighting against, almost a seemingly endless battle. And the way to change that is via awareness on Capitol Hill, off Capitol Hill. ATS every year, multiple times a year, there's actually a staff in Washington that's completely focused on awareness activities and all of the activities that lead to advocacy on Capitol Hill, increasing federal dollars, trying to get research funded for any given disease that's important, including what's been happening in recent years with COVID and other viruses. We know that if someone's virus, they get a secondary infection, or the virus itself is extremely severe, the biggest danger is that they will end up in lung failure. And that's a complication that we do have tools to try and help, and at least give people comfort and allow them to heal if they can. But those are huge limitations that we still overcome.
Yeah. Did COVID do anything to advance research?
It absolutely did. I mean, I think before, 2020, you could ask probably 100 people, and 75 of them would not really know the difference between pulmonary, respiratory, and the lungs, what the lungs, really do. I mean, people know that they breathe with them, but they don't understand that they're basically your filter to the world. Everything that you breathe in a day, in a lifetime, goes through your lungs, and we don't get new ones, and we can't change them out except for transplant for a few. But we really, we're stuck with the ones we have, so we need to take care of them. And what we learned during COVID is that the lungs are precious, and that they can be easily damaged by some of these viral impacts. And our best case is to avoid getting sick in the first place. But we do need better therapies to prevent lung failure in all of those cases, and we're still working on that. Our researchers, our clinicians have been on the front line since day one of the pandemic, and they continue to take care of patients in the ICU worldwide. So I think on Capitol Hill, off Capitol Hill, we can make a huge impact in not preventing pandemics altogether necessarily, but in managing the viruses that we have, just like bird flu, and hoping that we can use what we have to prevent those from being pandemics and major outbreaks.
Teresa, you've been so involved with ATS in many areas, serving on many committees. I'm curious about the Public Advisory Roundtable. Would you inform us on what it does? Sure. The Public Advisory Roundtable is unique in the medical world. Really, the American Thoracic Society had proactively 20 years ago or so set up the Public Advisory Roundtable to represent patients and the patient voice in everything that the society does. And so that organization is made up of around 15 patient organizations, and the representatives change every few years. But the diseases are represented like, cystic fibrosis and asthma and pulmonary hypertension and COPD and alpha-1, pulmonary fibrosis. If you name the lung disease, chances are their voice is part of what we do. And every year at the international conference, the ATS hosts an event strictly for patients and families so that they can learn about, respiratory diseases, sleep issues, and critical care, and that they could be proactive in their care. And then at many of the sessions at the American Thoracic Society meeting, we actually assign patients to open up those meetings and share their perspective for a few minutes so that the physicians who are in the audience, not that they're going to forget that their patients are important, but to just remind us every day that the reason we're here is to really, at the end of the day, help patients and make their lives better. And that's, why PAR is so wonderful. And there really isn't anything like it around the world that we're aware of that does what it does. And every member of PAR also serves on one of the committees of the ATS, and there are many of them. So all I can say is, ATS is one of the societies that really believes that the patient voice is critical to literally everything the society does. So I'm really pleased and proud to be part of it. I'm with a nonprofit called PF Warriors, and we just joined this year. Although I did chair PAR for 5 years, years ago, and I just recently came back on. But it's been absolutely one of the most important parts of my entire career. So thanks for asking.
Thank you, Teresa, and thank you so much for all you're doing. And thank you so much for joining Breathe Easy. I hope to see you on the first Tuesday of next month to share the latest from the ATS.
Thank you for joining us today. To learn more, visit our website at thoracic.org. Find more ATS Breathe Easy podcasts on Transistor, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a show.